please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
In the past week, there have been 2 or 3 instances of auditors qualifying the approval to audited statements of companies by raising red flags and saying they are not confident that some subsidiaries of the company can continue as a going concern. Auditors of Reliance Naval and Reliance Infra made these observations last week, and this week HCC's auditors raised some red flags on the accounts of its subsidiary Lavasa. So what we are asking today is why this increase in the number of instances where auditors are refusing to fully endorse subsidiaries' accounts? What are the implications of these qualifications for investors and bankers? And more importantly, are we going to see more such instances? Joining us to discuss these questions are former ICAI presidents, that is the Chartered Accountants body, Amarjit Chopra, Ved Jain, Manoj Fadnis. Also joining me will be former Executive Director of SEBI, Jane Gupta. But first up, here's my colleague Anisha with exactly what the auditors have said in recent cases. Anisha.
Well, yes, Lataf, today HCC was down about 25% in trade after auditors raised red flag regarding one of the group companies, Lavasa Corporation. Now, Lavasa has been under SDR since last year, but this is the first time the auditors have really given out a qualified opinion. Now, they have raised 3 qualifications as far as Lavasa Corporation is concerned. First, they say that there are outstanding creditors to the tune of around 3,000 crores, but since they have got no direct confirmation from these lenders, they are not able to vouch whether that number that the company is reporting in its book is correct or not. They have a similar view as far as the carrying value of some capital work in progress is concerned, because they say that since earlier years they have been carrying around 1,200 crores as the carrying value of capital work in progress, but there is no way for them to ascertain whether this value is an asset that they should show in the books or not. And lastly, they mentioned that the overall financial systems and internal controls of the company are weak. Now, they make other observations as well regarding the current liabilities of the subsidiary being higher than the current assets. They talk about how the net worth of the company has eroded, and that is why it raises a material uncertainty regarding the going concern of the subsidiary itself. Now, this is something that we also heard from the auditors in the case of Reliance Naval as well as Reliance Infrastructure. Now, while for Reliance Naval it was for their business, for Reliance Infrastructure it was regarding the subsidiaries Reliance Naval as well as the metro business of the company, and they said that there is a material uncertainty regarding the going concern. They talked about how current liabilities are more than assets, how net worths have eroded, how they're winding up petitions that have been filed by the creditors. So all these really made them question the going concern of the company, and that's why, Lata, it's very important going forward to keep a very close eye on the auditors' comment of what they are saying about the companies in this quarter as well. Back to you.
Okay, well, actually, if you can stay on, Anisha, you know, I went through all those auditor reports. Can you quickly explain the legalese here? You know, there are qualifications given, and then they say, but this does not modify our opinion. And then they use things like emphasis of matter. If you can just go through the jargon.
Well, yes, Lata, to make things easier, let's pick up the analogy of a classroom wherein the auditor can be the teacher and the companies can be the students. Now, audit report is basically telling you the report card of how the accounts of the company have been made. Now, broadly speaking, there are 2 types of auditor's report. One is the unmodified or the unqualified type of report, and the other is the modified, which means that the auditor has concerns about the way the accounts have been presented. Now, further, it is broken down in terms of without emphasis of matter and with emphasis of matter. Now, as far as unqualified report is concerned, that means that the auditor does not have very material concerns about the company. If it is without emphasis of matter, this is something only the top students get, which do not provide any problem to the teacher. But the other type of it, which is with emphasis of matter, and that is what you were asking me about. Now, these are type of concerns that are important for the company and for the shareholders, but that necessarily does not mean that the company is not providing the accounts in the correct manner. The example can be contingent liability of, let's say, a suit which is filed on the company. Now, the company might have mentioned it in the footnote, But if it is very important and material for the company, the auditor might mention it as the emphasis of matter. The other type of report which you don't want to get is the modified report. Now, the first one of it is with qualifications, wherein the auditor believes that there have been misstatements in the account. They are material, maybe not pervasive enough to go through the entire accounts, but there are material misstatements. Case in point can be, let's say, a depreciation method wherein the company has not followed the accounting standards, but that definitely does not mean that the entire accounts of the company or the going concern of the company is it. So that would be a qualified opinion. Other than that is the adverse opinion, which is one of the worst that you can get. That means that the auditor is saying that you have misrepresented your numbers. That is material information as well as pervasive to your accounts. And lastly is the disclaimer of opinion, wherein the auditor says, I have not got enough information, I cannot really form an opinion, and hence they give a disclaimer of opinion.
Okay, that's a lot to remember. So we will keep running those definitions. Anisha, of course, will come and join me in this Q&A session. But let me invite my guests. We are being joined by former ICAI, Institute of Chartered Accountants, presidents, Amarjit Chopra, Ved Jain, Manoj Fadnis, and also by former Executive Director of SEBI, J.N. Gupta. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Mr. Amarjit Chopra, let me start with you first. Is there any increase, or are we just blowing up 2 instances?
No, I don't think that these 2 instances can be treated as too much of an increase. And I can only share with you that these kind of matters have all been reported even earlier. Even if I go back to more than 30 years back, the matters with regard to going concern were raised even in the case of Modi spinning for that particular matter. So I think looking at just 2 or 3, I may not be able to say that there is too much of an increase, but this has come in the last 1 week.
Yes.
Probably that is what it makes it appear that there is too much of an increase in this.
But 3 instances in 1 week, Mr. Chopra, which is what is concerning investors. Let me go to the former regulator, Mr. Gupta. 3 instances of auditors either saying that we are not modifying the opinion, but there is emphasis of matter, or in one case even qualifying the opinion. Would you say that there is an increase in trend? And if yes, why?
First of all, in one word, I will say I am delighted.
Okay.
Not because there are audit opinions, but I feel that this is a going forward to a transparency and more reliability of the accounts, which is a good thing for all concerned, all stakeholders. Now, I will agree with Mr. Chopra that it may not signify that there is going to likely to be more increase, but yes, if the transparency comes, and I would say that it's coming of the age of the audit profession, because now they are realizing that they are under watch for so long. You remember Mr. Prime Minister's speech on the Chartered Accountant Foundation Day, and then there are a lot of recommendations that have been made in Kotak Committee, where it has been mandated that auditors have to audit the consolidated accounts, they have to give opinion about subsidiaries and all that matters. So, and then they have to give reason for resignation also. Earlier what used to happen, that they could say the personal reason or unwillingness of all that nonsense. But so what is happening is this: if it is going to increase transparency and if it is going to make them more responsible, there could be nothing better for the corporate governance in this country. And remember, it needed only 1 TN session to reform the election process. And if we had 10 auditors like this, today the auditors are chosen not for their quality work but for their pliability. Now, if the profession turns to the quality, then the pliability, then I think we are going to see a very good day.
That's a strong statement that you are making, and as a former regulator, we'll take it seriously. But really, Mr. Jain, you know, screws have been tightened. Mr. Gupta referred to the Prime Minister's speech to the ICAI, which was fairly strong, saying that, you know, you help people to evade taxes, not just plan them. But more importantly, you know, after the Nirav Modi case, the screws have definitely tightened. Bankers are feeling the heat like nobody's business, and next to the bankers come the auditors. So do you think that the auditors are now raising these flags simply because, I mean, it is very obvious that with the Reserve Bank forcing bankers to put the divergence in the public domain, the heat will be on them, and that is why these red flags. Do you see this as a trend? Okay, we will get Ved Jain in a minute. Just lost that connection. Mr. Fadnis, I was going to repeat the same question to you. Do you think regulators have gotten more strict with RBI publicly asking for divergence announcements? And do you think, therefore, this is a trend and will become a trend?
Well, Madam Lata, just to say that the auditors have been, as Mr. Chopra also explained, have been issuing audit reports in accordance with the standards on auditing. And today what we see is, and what has been also happening in the past, is that the auditors have been issuing reports. Maybe at times in the earlier past they did not get noticed. Few years ago, if you recall, SEBI had constituted a committee and where there were qualified audit opinions. So in those cases, the companies were being asked to restate their financial statements to the extent they were being disclosed in the stock exchanges. So there has been a positive move for the regulators to take note of what is being qualified by the auditors, and that's a healthy trend. So far as the comments with respect to the specific cases which you mentioned, I mean, it may not be possible to comment on that. But if you appreciate that emphasis of matter and qualification of opinions, qualified audit reports. So these are technical matters wherein the auditor is expressing emphasis of matter in the sense that there is something which is very important for the investors to understand, on which the auditor is not issuing an opinion. So typically like going concern, the concept of going concern is one of the fundamental accounting assumptions. Now going concern is based on the promoter's ability to infuse funds in future. So that is something which the auditor cannot comment upon because it's a future event. And therefore, very rightly, the auditors give an emphasis of matter that they have relied on the going concern concept based on the promoter's ability to infuse the fund. So these are very correct and technically right methodologies in which the auditors express their opinion on subject matters. Can I just add also on the one of the cases which you commented, and I had an occasion to see that, the two companies where you mentioned Reliance Infrastructure. So therein, we should also keep in mind how the law has evolved. So Companies Act 2013, before it came into operations, we had Companies Act 1956, and where there were court schemes, and court schemes permitted, with the permission of the Honorable High Courts, to have certain accounting treatment which could be different from the accounting standards. So if there is an order of the Honorable Court, so that has to be followed, and the auditor cannot qualify. Now, these are cases which are legacy issues where there have been, prior to 2013, there were certain court schemes approved, as a result of which certain accounting treatments are being followed, which are not in consistence with the accounting standards.
Mr. Fadnis,
therefore, the auditor gives an emphasis of matter.
Right, Mr. Fadnis, take your point on that, but I wanted to check something with Mr. Gupta. Mr. Gupta, you raised the point regarding how resignation was used by the auditors as a tool, and there have also been instances where the current auditors just take up the report of the predecessors and say that it was an unmodified report, and they carry forward that view. Also, the Company Law 2013 just gives you a period of 10 years before you are really needed to change the auditor. Do you think there is a case for even changing the law and maybe bringing down the number of years an auditor is required to be on board?
See, there is already law that auditors cannot be there for more than 10 years, 5 plus 5. But my issue is, I would say that law is not material in this country because you have got so many laws, but compliance of that law is very, very big issue. And if you see, all the time we make law based on some reaction. Some mishap has happened and the law is created. I would like to see a day when the law gets created on the best practices. And I would want that auditors, as you said, the auditors are the first gatekeepers of the stakeholder interest. And we have seen a lot of failures. And I feel that now we are on the stage where auditors are going to change for future, because now they have to be answerable to so many things. And with this NCLT thing, all other things coming up, the accounts will become a major issue. And if somebody finds that accounts were not correct, then auditors will be taken to the court.
That's my point. You know, that's the point, Mr. Gupta, which I wanted even... I'll come back to you. Just get Mr. Jain in now that we have connected to him. Mr. Jain, Are recent events now casting a pressure on auditors? Both the regulator, the Reserve Bank's insistence on announcing divergence in the public domain, the Prime Minister's speech to the ICAI, the Nirav Modi case, and the spotlight on what were the current auditors doing for that branch, that bank branch, and of course the NCLT issue. Are all these going to make auditor qualifications a trend?
See, Lata, we must need to first appreciate the present state of economy and the situation why this is happening. See, what is the role of the auditor? Auditor is to report on the state of affair of a company which he is auditing. Now, the two examples which you have given, where the auditors have given their qualification and have given a qualified report, this means that those companies have not been doing well and there are issues because they could not meet the challenges of the what we call economic condition. So what the auditors say, look, that as a going concern, there have been losses, there are issues, capital work in progress, which I am not able to verify. So this is the role of the auditor. Auditor has to report it. So these instances are not increasing because that something has happened to the auditing profession or that there is a pressure on the auditing profession. The auditors have given a report based on the current state of affairs. I believe the auditing profession since independence, I will say the institute came in existence since 1949, has been maintaining very high standards and ensuring that all compliances are done. See, you look at as on date, the chartered accountant which is being produced by the ICAI is one of the best competitive chartered accountant globally accepted. Now, issue which arises on corporate governance or other governance, see, whether it is a Nirav Modi case, it is a Punjab National Bank case or any other case, it is an auditor which is being a security guard, which is being a watchkeeper. He is a person who is reporting it out. Now, even in the Nirav Modi case, till today for the last 2 months, though issues may have been raised, but nobody has come forward where the auditors have faulted. So the system which has been faulted and which was the role of the auditor, if one can say, yes, this was the system which was supposed to be checked by the auditor, which he has failed, then I can accept, yes, there is a failure. The issue here is that even in the Punjab National Bank case, today till date, there is nowhere any material or anywhere that this was supposed to be done by the auditor and which he has failed to carry out. Now, I give a very generic example because some of the issues have been raised that there is a pressure because there is a media hype created and there have been certain discussion going at the various level about the auditing profession. But I am of the view that so far auditing profession is concerned, their institute is developing accounting standard and auditing standard, which are dynamic over a
Mr. Jain, we have to take a mandatory break over here. We are coming back in a minute. The former heads of the ICAI don't quite agree that this is a new trend. They believe that they were always qualifying auditor reports, but the regulator, former regulator, begs to differ. We'll take a short break and come back and resume this conversation. To our CNBC TV18 special, we are discussing 3 at least, or maybe increasing instances of auditors red flagging some of the statements made in the P&Ls of leading companies. We have been speaking with former ICAI presidents Amarjit Chopra, Ved Jain, Manoj Fadnis, and former executive director of SEBI, Mr. J.N. Gupta. Well, Mr. Chopra, why is it that the auditor qualifications are couched in so much legalese that a common investor cannot understand? How many investors will be able to understand the difference between emphasis of matter, not modified but qualified? I mean, why can't it be plain legalese and tell us should we believe the accounts or not?
You see, Lata, I think it's very easy to sit down and criticize something, but let's put a hand on heart and find out whether the Indian chartered accountants are following the international standards or not. If all standards on auditing that the Indian chartered accountants are following are the international standards on auditing, and there also the treatment is absolutely the same, the language is the same. I think if at all the change has to take place, it has to change place first at the international level. And mind it, whatever qualifications have been given, and as I think Vedji put it and as Manojji put it, I will only say one thing, that if I am unsure of certain realization myself, look at the case of the current assets being lesser than the current liabilities, or Let's take the case of the impairment. If the impairment study has not been conducted, who is supposed to get it conducted? Not the auditor. It is only the management, the independent directors, the audit committee chairman has to be held responsible for that. And if the auditor is highlighting this particular fact, that I cannot comment upon it, rather it should be a ground for the independent directors and the management to look at it and see that it is ensured in the next year. So what is important to be understood is, if a court case is going on, the auditor will not be able to say what is going to be the decision. No, next year onwards, you will find the further changes even coming in, because the moment Asset 702 comes into play, even all key audit matters, today whatever is there in the notes to accounts or contingent liability, a very significant part thereof, you will start finding in the auditor's report also without qualifying those audit reports. Let's be very clear about it, and that's happening internationally also. And we have to appreciate one thing, as the economy changes, as the economy evolves, there are so many things which evolve. Today even, I will like to say one thing.
You have to be quick, sir.
The role of the SEBI is the same what it was 10 years back. Yes, I'm trying to be quick. It is not the role of the SEBI what it was 10 years back. Similarly, the RBI is interpreting the things differently what it used to do otherwise.
So that is exactly my point,
2 years back or 3 years back.
No, that is exactly my point, sir.
I'm trying to make
Regulators, the MCA, the Prime Minister, all of them are in a different mode altogether. I mean, we are seeing them. So, you know, we are out of time. Mr. Chopra, Mr. Chopra, we are out of time. I have to give 30 seconds to the other participants as well. Mr. Gupta, very quickly.
I will only say, statement of the Prime Minister, fine. But look at, we are the only institute in the entire country which has been taking action against our own members, even for the lifetime debarment.
Mr. Chopra. Mr. Chopra,
so I'm not on that particular point.
I'm not pointing
right now.
Mr. Chopra, I'm not here to point fingers. I'm just asking whether there is a rising trend of auditors pointing out. Mr. Gupta, we are actually running out of time.
No, I will only say one thing.
Mr. Chopra, I'll come back to you later, please.
I think
Mr. Chopra, you will have to let the others speak. Okay, Mr. Gupta, last word from you. Do you think the auditors are qualifying reports because of pressure or because the economy is going in a downturn and that is why they had to do this?
I would say it is a change and welcome change because auditors are under pressure and transparency. And I would request all three of my fellow panelists that they should look at the balance sheet and audited accounts of Treehouse Limited and see whether they would have given the report that auditors gave. We, without having audit knowledge, we pointed out problems, but audited community did not. So let them have a look at those balance sheets and see whether they would have given the same report or they would have qualified the account. That is my counter question. And I would say that it is a welcome change, and if the auditors change, probably the independent directors will also change because then they also will become under questions.
Well,
it will be a cascading effect.
Mr. Fadnis, you have just about 30 seconds. Your thoughts, do you think auditors have become more careful and more proactive in pointing red flags because the entire ecosystem has changed?
Well, I don't think that the auditors are under any kind of pressures, and because of that, they are pointing out these red flags. This is how the audit profession has evolved, and this is reporting the matters as the auditors come across. I agree. It is good that the auditors' qualifications are being taken note of and are being discussed. Even emphasis of matter is being discussed on public debate. So that is a good development. But these are things which are happening even in the past. Unfortunately, I believe they went unnoticed.
Actually, we're completely out of time. Mr. Jain, Mr. Fadnis, Mr. Chopra and Mr. Gupta, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. Former presidents of ICAI maintaining that the audit profession always made these qualifications. They're just getting more notice because people like Gupta and investor advisory groups are putting the spotlight on them. Well, one doesn't think that this is as simple as that. Clearly, in the last 1 week, we have had 3 auditors of leading companies putting in the public domain some red flags. This looks like a trend in the days to come as more and more accounts and account statements are made public. We will know whether this is going to be a larger trend, and of course there's no doubt that it is certainly healthy for investor interest. Thank you very much for watching this special show from CNBC TV18, Auditors Qualify.